Hello, everybody. Chapter 6, Dearborn Essentials of New Jersey Real Estate. We're going to do the key terms again. Going to go through my rigmarole. What I'm going to do is say the word. You're going to see it pop up on your screen, and then you're going to get a little explanation of what it is. And then if I need to supplement it with some kind words of my own, I will do so. So, without further ado, and again, I'm going to give you a couple seconds between each one. Um, Here we go. Construction lien. Construction lien. This is placed against real estate by a worker who has not been paid. This is also referred to as a mechanic's lien. And this is, if we're categorizing our liens, when we're talking about liens, which is a financial encumbrance against your real estate that you own, a construction lien or a mechanic's lien is classified as voluntary, okay, because it's something that you do not have to have work done, a voluntary specific lien, okay? And this is when you have a worker come out who has not been paid, okay? Voluntary specifically, because it has to do with the real estate that they're working on, okay? That they're working on. Also, actually, I will say this. Depending on the situation, obviously, if there's some sort of legal dispute where you have not agreed to putting a mechanic's lien on the house, this could be an involuntary lien. So it kind of could be both. So I'm going to put it at that. So depending on the situation, it could be that. But let's not dive too much into that. What you really want to know is a construction lien or mechanic's lien is placed against the real estate by a worker who has not been paid. Convey, convey, convey. Transfer by sale or gift. I'm conveying real estate to you. Okay? Conveying real estate to you is by sale or gift. This is different than devise. I don't know if I have devise in here in this chapter. Devise with a V, I'm saying it, is to will real estate. Okay, when you die, testate, meaning that you have a will, you will be devising the real estate. When you convey it, this is transferring it by sale or by gift. Courtesy, courtesy, courtesy. This is the husband's rights in the wife's property. These are dower and courtesy rights. When we get to dower, I'm going to tell you how I remember this and how I remember whose property it's in. So this is the husband's rights in the wife's property. Dower and courtesy rights were abolished. They're an ancient right that was abolished May 28th, 1980. So you want to remember that date. May 28th, 1980. Dower and courtesy rights do not exist anymore. So if you have dower and courtesy rights prior to that, they're still going to be acknowledged. After that, there were no new dower and courtesy rights created. Dominant estate. Dominant estate. And this is when we're going to be referring to easements. This is a property that benefits from an easement. Okay. So they also might refer to this as the dominant tenement. So keep that terminology in mind. And also, when you're studying for your real estate exam, know the alternatives, know what else they could use, because depending on what book you're reading, depending on what test you get, they can word it differently. So kind of just get familiar with the alternatives that you can have in regards to each word that they could use in the terminology. So dominant estate, also they might refer to it as a dominant tenement, okay? And that is a property that benefits from an easement. Also, the dominant tenement is the only one that can dissolve certain easements, okay? There are certain easements that cannot be dissolved by the dominant tenement. An easement can never be dissolved solely by exercise of the servient tenement, which is the opposite of the dominant tenement. Dower. Dower. And I just told you guys, this is the opposite of courtesy. So this is the wife's rights or interest in the husband's property. Dower. How do I remember dower? I always remember dower, and I'll tell you why. Wife is interested in getting into the husband's dockers. So I always think the first two letters just pop into my mind, dower. I always think wife's interested in getting into the husband's dockers. So it's the wife's interest or the wife's rights in what the husband has. And then if you just know the opposite of it, you're going to have courtesy as the opposite of that. And you could come up with different things to remember each one. Easement. Easement. This is a permanent right to use another's land. I don't like the word permanent because I just told you a couple of slides ago, an easement can be dissolved. Certain easements, an easement appurtenant and an easement by prescription can be dissolved by the dominant tenement. Okay. Also, easements can be dissolved. There's an easement by necessity. If there's no longer a necessity that exists, then what happens is you can have actually the easement by necessity will automatically dissolve once there is no longer a necessity. So the necessity creates the easement. Once there's no longer a necessity, then there's no need for there to be an easement by necessity. Easement appurtenant. You know, take a little sip. Easement appurtenant. So this is a right that runs with the property. Actually, the word appurtenant, and I don't think it's in actually any of the terminology that we're going to be using in this book. Appurtenant actually means running with the property. So it's actually a right that runs with the property. I'm going to kind of give you a little better definition of this. An easement appurtenant is actually voluntary easement. This is something that two adjoining properties, and it has to be adjoining properties because if they are not adjoining properties, then what happens is those are typically licenses, okay? But an easement appurtenant is two adjacent tracts of land or properties that will share an easement, a right of usage, okay? And basically they come to it with, you know, a voluntary agreement, okay? And once that easement appurtenant is created, yes, it runs with the property. Easement by prescription also is appurtenant because it does run with the land, okay? It does transfer down when title transfers, okay? When title transfers by way of deed, then what happens is you're going to have essentially an appurtenant easement, but it could be a prescriptive easement. I'm getting really confusing with this stuff, but I think it's important to really understand it. An easement is a right to use land. There is an easement appurtenant, an easement by prescription, an easement by necessity, and an easement by gross, okay? The easement by prescription and appurtenant are voluntary easements. Actually, excuse me, appurtenant, voluntary. Prescription is the dominant tenement getting a prescriptive period on their usage and applying for an easement by prescription because they have met the prescriptive period of 20 years consecutive open and hostile usage. Easement by necessity. Let's chat about this a little bit. I think we said it before. Easement by necessity. This is the right to access a landlocked parcel. Yeah, there's some sort of necessity for you to go over a tract of land or several tract of land. So what happens is if you're landlocked, you could have an easement over several pieces of land. Typically it's one, but you know, everyone could say to me, well, what about this scenario? Yeah, absolutely. There are scenarios that could come up. You can give me examples where practically you can have 2 easements, 3 easements, and they're usually pretty easy to spot because you're like, oh, there's a piece of land, and oh, there's a piece of property that's over yonder, and it just doesn't have a way to access anything except by going over another's land. So an easement by necessity, and as I was saying before, an easement by necessity, the dominant tenement cannot even say, hey, I don't need this anymore. If you're landlocked, you need it, okay? And it's created at the onset of a necessity being there, and then as soon as the necessity no longer exists, it's dissolved. Easement by prescription. Easement by prescription. This is a right sometimes acquired through usage. Let me tighten that one up. Yeah, it's always acquired through usage because what happens is you have to use that tract in a open and hostile manner for 20 years consecutively uninterrupted. And when I say open and hostile, I don't mean that you're going out as a one-man band, you know, and you get your bass drum and your trombone and you're going out there and going, I'm using your property. It's you're using it in a way that it is known. However, it could be simply something that you're using it and it's just an innocent open and hostile usage where you just don't even realize it. And you're the landowner of the property that you're using, so the servient tenement, might not even realize it either. But then what happens is if there is a dispute that comes up post 20-year usage, what happens is the dominant tenement can then apply for an easement by prescription. But if any time during the 20 years it becomes known and you're asked to stop or no longer use that, then your 20-year period is interrupted and you cannot apply for an easement by prescription. Easement in gross. An easement in gross, also referred to as a flipperoni here. Gross easement, this is sometimes referred to as. And that's the right use for utility lines on another's land. Other utility companies, too, would have this. Water companies, sometimes, if there's some sort of piping for public sewer, public water, things like that. So these are like several utility companies might have rights to use your land to access their lines and service them. How do I remember this? Great question. Easement and gross. Power lines are gross to look at. But I always remember. Power lines are gross to look at. Utilities are gross, and this is your utility. So an easement in gross, okay, is for your utility companies. And actually, let me kind of dive into the wording a little bit. It's actually not because it's gross. It's gross because of the word gross meaning in totality. So what happens is if there's a street, they have a gross easement over like all of them that they're going to be servicing properties for. So there's an easement in gross of the town, of the street. It's not actually on each individual property. It could be if there's a town that has like just a few homes that are actually having public utilities. That could happen, but they still refer to it as an easement in gross because it usually covers more than one land. It's usually not particular to one particular piece of property. But I remember it because power lines are gross to look at. Encroachment. Football season's starting up. I always think of that. So if you remember encroachment in football, it's in real estate, it's a building that intrudes on another's land. So it's actually like a building, but in football, it's actually an individual player who crosses over the line, you know, kind of encroaches on that property. So a building intruding on another's land, kind of some sort of man-made improvement. I don't even like the word building. I always like saying improvement because it could be a fence. It could be a shed. Well, that would be a building, but it could be something. It's going to be some sort of improvement, okay? Even if I did landscaping, let's say I did landscaping, or I'm drooling over this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful turtle land sculpture that put in a garden, and my wife won't let me get it. So maybe someday I'll have my massive turtle, and then I want to put a wreath over its neck for Christmas and all that stuff. It's incredibly tacky, but I want it. But that could be an encroachment if I put it in the wrong space. If I'm going 5 feet over onto my neighbor's property, my turtle, or a portion of it, could be considered an encroachment. Encumbrance. I've said this word before in this video. Encumbrance. That's any easement, encroachment, etc. An encumbrance is a basically, think of this as something that lessens the your ownership rights. Okay, so we're talking about ownership rights in this chapter, right? We're talking about things like that. This is going to be something that takes away from, becomes a liability. It could be financial or physical. So an easement and encroachment would be considered physical encumbrances, right? Our financial encumbrances would be liens, right? Property taxes, things like that. Estate in land. Estate in land. This is also known as freehold estate. This is basically quantifying your ownership, right? Fee simple, fee defeasible, fee determinable, kind of that's the same thing, and life estate. And it's going into what is this? This is basically another way of saying freehold estate. Okay, so estate in land is basically a quantification of your ownership, amount of ownership. Fee determinable is one of the freehold estates. Fee determinable, or I also refer to it as fee conditional or conditional fee, which is actually literally what it is. It's ownership as long as. Keep in mind, the as long as has to be lawful. Okay, if the as long as is not lawful, then it cannot be abided by. Okay, it's ownership, meaning that you have the bundle of rights. You can have full and complete ownership as long as blank. Be simple. Be simple. Fee simple is also referred to as absolute. Absolute fee, fee absolute. So, and again, get used to seeing these different terminologies because you will hear them. This is the most complete ownership of land possible. Most complete, most complete. This is typically what everyone owns real estate in. If they said, what's your estate in land, it's usually going to be fee simple. Okay. Freehold estate, freehold estate. I also say estate in land, and that's ownership lasting indefinitely. No. Look, listen, this is what they said. I'm tweaking it. It is definitely not indefinitely because a freehold estate, right? Freehold estate has two types of freehold estates or estates in land that would not be indefinite. And if you think about it, let me ask you, I'm going to ask you, based on what I've just said, what are two types of freehold estates that are not indefinite? That would be fee conditional, fee defeasible, which is the same thing, okay? Which is ownership as long as, which definitely is not indefinitely. And also a life estate, which is, and we'll get into that in a little bit, that's ownership based on the life of something, okay? Which is definitely not indefinitely. General lien. General lien. Claim against all property someone owns. Yes. So if I am a trillionaire, I have a judgment against me, okay, I will probably have a claim against all the property I own. My home in the Hamptons, my one over in Nantucket, everything. So all of them will have claims against them, okay? Involuntary lien. Involuntary lien. This is a form of a financial encumbrance, right? These are property taxes are an example of this. Abso-freaking-lutely. Also, actually, judgments are another form of involuntary lien. Okay, property taxes are definitely involuntary. Leasehold estate. Leasehold estate. Also referred to as less than freehold estate. This is a right to use and possess for a limited time. Yeah, so understand this. Leasehold estates are an interest in land. That is some sort of interest in the property. You do have an interest in it. It is less than ownership, hence why we refer to it as less than freehold estates in some manner, shape, or form. And it's also referred to as leasehold estates. So, and again, this is a lot of words coming at you, but that's why this is important. This kind of stuff, listening to this, hearing these words used over and over again, the right to use the property, right to use and possess for a limited time. Okay, and when we get into leasehold estates, we'll go into, if you've read that chapter, you've gone over that video, you'll hear the different types of leasehold estates that we have. But we're not going to get into that here because, again, this is all about our ownerships and estates and land. License. 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 Temporary permission. I give you a license. I give you a perfect example, right? My high school parking lot did not have a lot of spaces in it, but I had to be one of the cool kids because I wasn't smart, so I had to be one of the cool cats. So what I did was, in order to take my car to school, I went around and I knocked on the doors of the houses across the street from the high school. And I actually negotiated a license for me to have permission to park in one of their driveways during the school year. And I think I did something for them. I work around the house or like rake leaves or something. Like I did something, but I mean, to me that was an important thing. So I did that. I had a license to park my car during the school year in someone's driveway. Okay, so license, temporary permission. Lien. Talking about these things, a lien. A lien is a financial encumbrance. It's a financial claim against the real estate. Okay, liens have to be paid off in the order that they are recorded, except there's always, we're talking about priority right now of the liens. Priority of the financial claims against the real estate have to be paid off in the order in which they were recorded, not in which they occurred. Those could be two separate things, right? Those could be two separate things. Okay, I could take out a loan and give the bank a mortgage. Okay, that's something you're going to have to get used to, right? So who gives the mortgage, right? The loan, the money is not the mortgage. Let's understand that. The mortgage is that promise to repay the bank for that loan, okay? So when you give the bank the mortgage, they record a lien, okay, a voluntary specific lien on the home. And that goes in the order of recording, okay? So, and if you take out an equity loan, you know, a couple years later, that would be take priority after all the ones that have been recorded before that, except our general ad valorem taxes, okay? And when we say ad valorem taxes, again, whenever there's a chance for us to use our big boy words, we're going to. Ad valorem, Latin for according to value, okay? So the according to value taxes, which is what you would think of as your general real estate taxes, always take first priority. Priority number one are our ad valorem general real estate taxes. After that comes every other lien, mechanics, financial, all that kind of stuff. Judgments in the order of recording. Life estate. Life estate. That's complete ownership until someone's death. Yeah, you could mortgage property. You can sell the property. And people always ask me, they always say, Stu, but why would someone want to buy a life estate? Okay? Because that's all you can transfer, right? That's the ownership that you have. So you have complete ownership until someone's death. And I always say this. What's funny is whenever we talk about life estates, people always want to know the practical, like why would you sell it? Why would you will it, right? Because you have complete ownership. So you could devise that interest that you have, okay? As long as it's not based on your death, okay? If it's based on your death, then it would go right back to someone. But if it's based on the life of someone else, okay, which is referred to as a life estate pour au travail, okay? Life estate pour au travail based on the life of another. Then you can certainly devise it. You can certainly sell it, okay? And here's the thing. Will it have full fair market value? No, right? No. But will it have a value greater than zero? Yes. So I think that's what's really important to understand is that there isn't going to be complete value in it in regards to fair market. However, there is definitely a value in owning a life estate that is greater than zero, less than full fair market value, if that makes sense. Lispendence. Another Latin word. Lispendence. This is notice that a lien may be filed. Legal action pending is actually what it means in Latin. And keep in mind, I'm saying this like I know Latin. Like, I'm like, no. This is exactly what it means. So if you're watching this and you're like, that's technically not what lispendence means, feel free to correct me. I have no problem with that. But lispendence, legal action pending. I always remember because it does sound kind of like pending. This is basically notice that a lien may be filed. It's pretty clear. Mortgage lien. Mortgage lien. This is a lender's claim against real estate, okay? Because the lender is actually holding the mortgage. Okay, the lender gets the mortgage because the mortgage Again, the mortgage is not the money. Say that a million times. The mortgage is not the money. The mortgage is the promise to repay for the loan. The loan is what the buyer gets. Okay, the borrower gets the loan. They get the money. Okay, they then give that to the seller. Okay, and then the buyer gives the mortgage to the lender. Okay, the lender's claim against the real estate. So the mortgage lien is the lender's claim against the real estate. They have that basically as an asset, as a promise to repay the loan. Party wall, the wall that has balloons and the party hats, right? Where the happening stuff happens. This is a structure owned by two adjoining landowners. Excuse me. I always think, I grew up in Brooklyn, and I always think that, I always had a wall between me and some of the neighbors, and my grandparents, Italian grandparents, would always like grow like big trees and squash all along that. And then on the other side, we would actually like go over. We had a ladder and go over and go to the neighbor's yard and everything. It was it was a cool time growing up in the 80s and 90s in Brooklyn. So I always think about that as that's a great example of a party wall, right? A fence could technically be a party wall, right? It's actually, no, fence really wouldn't be, more a wall, because fence is actually owned by one. So a wall that is kind of shared by two, okay, would be a party wall. Priority, priority, priority. This is when we're talking about liens, right? This is the order in which the liens are going to be paid off, okay? And we just talked about that, right? Our ad valorem taxes, boom, first priority, always. After that, order in which they are recorded, which they occur, order in which they're recorded. Remainder man. Remainder man. This is a third party who will gain eventual control. This is really referring to whatchamacallit, life estate, right? A life estate. Let's say I own a property. I give a life estate to my aunt, okay? I give a life estate to my aunt based on the life of my grandparents, okay? And then it goes back to my brother when my grandparents die. Confusing. I had to make that confusing because I wanted to. But my brother, who is the third party, who will gain eventual control, right? That is the remainder man. And no, I do not have a brother, but for this example, I do. Reversionary interest, reversionary interest, reversionary interest. Future interest of an owner. That example, give a life estate to my aunt based on the life of my grandparents. Grandparents pass away, reverts back to me. I have reversionary interest. So it's the same thing. It's kind of like a remainder man, but what happens is reversionary interest goes back to the owner. Remainder man is someone who holds future interest and is a third party, is not the owner. Servient estate, the servient estate. This has to do with the easements. Think, think, think. That's a tract over which an easement runs. This is the one that cannot dissolve the easement. This is the one that serves the easement because they're servient. Okay. Opposite of dominant tenement or dominant estate. Okay. Specific lien. Specific lien. A claim against one parcel of real estate, right? With something specific, it's a claim against one. General liens across several. My home in the Hamptons, my home in Nantucket. Where else should I have a home? Cape May, New Jersey. Love Cape May. Love Cape May. Cute little town. Tacking. 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 This is adding successive periods of usage. That's literally what it is. Tacking on to one another. Adding successive period of usage. Tacking. Voluntary lien. Voluntary lien. This is the V, so we're probably getting to the end. This is mortgage or equity loan, for example. Yeah, involuntary lien is something that basically you're kind of getting into it because you don't have to, right? I think that's it. I think this is all we have for this chapter. So that's it. That's all we got. All right. Have a good one, guys.